welcome to today's episode of Business Unzipped. I am on my own again today because I'm actually just doing a quick episode to talk about my reflections on what I've recorded so far and the guests that I've had on. Now, I've had some really inspirational guests and I've absolutely loved talking to every single one of them. One thing I have noticed is, apart from my first guest, Susie, all of the rest that I've had on so far have all been males. Some of that is because logistically we just haven't figured it out yet, but actually what I noticed was there was a lot more resistance from the females that I reached out to compared to the males. So I just wanted to delve a little bit deeper into that and to talk about whether we are still in a man's world, which I know might sound dramatic, but actually in just this short space of time, I've noticed so many things, and I think there are still some issues out there that it is really good to address and talk about in the hope that we can make a difference. So the first thing I want to talk about is confidence, and data and research shows that men are more comfortable with self-promotion than women. So in terms of like applying for a new job, if a guy only has sort of 25% of the criteria expected to get this job, they will still apply for it. Forget the other 75%, it's irrelevant. They've got 25%, they'll go for it. Whereas women, they're more likely to only apply for the job if they have 100% matched criteria. So think about how many jobs you haven't applied for because you don't fully meet all that criteria. And that's the only difference. Men will still go for it, women won't because they don't match it. But what's the worst that can happen? You don't get the job? Okay, well, you still went for it. So we're actually doing ourselves a disservice by not putting ourselves forward. We're not putting our hat in the ring. Therefore, we're definitely not going to get the job. And the same applies to asking for a pay rise. So data shows that men are 4 times more likely to ask for a pay rise in their role. 4 times, that's a lot. 4 times more likely than women to ask for a pay rise. And the women that are confident enough to ask for a pay rise will typically ask for 30% less. We know what we're worth, we're just not willing to ask for it. So I think there is definitely something in around the confidence that we feel as women does not match up to how men feel confident. And actually there was a study that took place in America where men and women were set this task to complete, and they were given their results. And the women, even if they performed well and they knew they performed well, they were told that they did well in that test, they would still downplay their achievement. So there's something in that. We just don't feel comfortable self-promoting. Even when we do well, we play it down. Oh, well, it wasn't that big deal. Oh, well, actually so-and-so helped me with that. Oh, I wouldn't have got it if it wasn't for this person or that person. Rather than, saying, yeah, I worked hard for that. I definitely deserve to get that. I put all of the graft in. I put all of the hard work in. I absolutely deserve that pay rise or that promotion. So there's something around confidence as women in the workplace and how we get better at self-promoting. The second thing that I wanted to talk about was responsibility. Now, we still, to this day, hold the lion's share of responsibility outside of the workplace, whether that is childcare responsibility, whether that is household or family commitments. It still falls on the women to take on the lion's share. I actually see this as a vicious circle because some say that the reason that they take on the lion's share is because of the gender pay gap and the fact that the man earns more. It makes sense as a household for the person that earns more to carry on working, and it is typically, not always, the woman who earns less, therefore they have to be the one that are flexible and will take a day off and will stay at home and will have that flexible working and allow the guy to focus on his job and his career while you take care of the house. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some women that want it that way, and that's absolutely fine, and I'm not coming at anyone in particular. I'm just talking about observations and how we break that sort of vicious cycle. And it is difficult because it is the women that carry the child, and then we have longer at home to look after the child and to raise that child. All the while that they're doing that, they're giving up their career for a certain period of time for the family, whereas a new father typically doesn't do that. They have a few weeks off, they're congratulated, taken out for a drink, and then they're back at work, and they can fully concentrate on work because they know that their children are being cared for at home by the mum, by the woman. When a woman goes back to work after taking that period of time off, they have the responsibility and the worry of what's happening to the child while they're at work, because it's not a straight swap. It's not that you've done 6 months now, the dad is going to do 6 months and take a career break. It doesn't work like that, and we can't afford for that to happen in the household. So there are childcare costs, there are childcare responsibilities. If your child is sick, you have to take time off. There shouldn't be a stigma around needing flexible working. And unfortunately, there is still a negative connotation that asking for flexible working means that you're not committed to your job, or, whatever it is people are thinking. But actually, we all have responsibility outside of work. That's a given. No one has no responsibility. And asking for flexible working is actually just being open and honest. It's being transparent. You are telling your employer what you can commit to and what you can't. And that should never be seen as a negative, because actually then when you are committed to that work, you give it 110%. If you're forced to work in a pattern that doesn't suit your lifestyle and your family commitments, how can you possibly be fully committed when all you're doing is worrying about who's going to pick the kids up from school, who's taking an elderly relative to their hospital appointment? It's a bit like the saying, happy wife, happy life. You have to look after your employees and be flexible for them so that they can give back to the company and help the organisation. It just doesn't make sense, but that connotation is still there and it does exist. So people do still see flexible working requests as a negative. The third thing I want to talk about is perception. Now, we will have a certain perception of ourselves, and naturally we will have perceptions of others. But in terms of women in the workplace, and don't get me wrong, it could be women that are giving this perception out as well, which is, it's something that we all need to work on. But there's a perception around women in the workplace and the labels that they are given. And these labels would not be given to men in the workplace. So if I'm being assertive, don't label me as being aggressive. If I'm leading a workshop, if I'm running a workshop, or if I am dishing out actions that need to be done, that is not me being bossy. If I'm telling you some home truths, that is not me being difficult. If I'm asking you hard questions, that's not me being awkward. And, the worst one for me, and it really grates on me, is, she's a bit much. What does that mean? What does that mean? I'm not being too much. Maybe you aren't enough and you need to step up. That's not me being too much. And I just don't hear that coming from men. I don't hear men being called bossy. They're known as a leader and they're being authoritative and they are getting the work done. I don't ever hear someone say, he's a bit much. No, you hear them say, he's really passionate, he's so driven. Okay, There's no difference. It's just that perception, because there's a perception on women that we should be, and we are, but that sort of maternal, loving, caring, nurturing. But there's a time and a place for that. And women in the workplace, I think we absolutely are. That's why women make great leaders, because we are still naturally caring and nurturing. But there is a time and a place that we have to have that authority and demonstrate that authority that is not being bossy or a bit much. And those sorts of derogatory comments that still take place in the workforce now do need to stop. You know, if someone's a bit passionate or is visibly triggered by something, the reaction shouldn't be, oh, she's probably on her period, or oh, she's probably due on. Are you kidding? We're still saying these things now in 2024. This is not good. And actually, I saw something really interesting on social media a couple of years ago now. And it was somebody in the streets asking some guys a question. And it was based in America. And the question was, who do you think is more in control of their emotions, men or women? And some pondered on it, some answered it straight away, but they all said men are more in control of their emotions. And I thought, okay, I'm going to see where this is going. And then they were asked why. And it was predominantly, well, you know, women are emotional and they cry and they do this and they do that. And it was basically, no one could really pinpoint an actual reason why they thought that. That was just their assumption and their perception that men are more in control of their emotions. This interviewer then asked 2 follow-on questions, which is where it got interesting. The first one was, name a female leader who has started a war. Now, I get that this question is a little bit controversial because typically men have always been leaders back in the day when women had to stay in the kitchen. Therefore, it's a skewed answer. The answer, nonetheless, is there aren't any. The second question was, name a female mass shooter. Now, this was an American study, so I know we don't really get those in the UK, but the point remains that people's perception on seeing a woman cry as a weakness is so false. Actually, women are so in tune with their emotion that they can handle it. So women typically are actually better at self-reflecting and understanding our emotion and our thoughts and our feelings and what that means in that situation and how to move on from that. We don't harbour it all up and it come out in some sort of angry way. So that was a really interesting study, because actually the perception on a woman crying is a sign of weakness, and of a guy getting angry as a sign of passion or dedication or some sort of positive affirmation as to that behaviour. And I think we all know now that that's not necessarily the case, and men are becoming more comfortable with showing their emotion, which means that they are getting a better handle on it too. But I do think that was a really interesting study, and if I can find it, I'll try and share it. It was great. There's also a perception on visible traits, more so again with women than men. And by this I mean we are still judged based on appearance. We wear too much makeup, we don't wear enough makeup. We dress too provocatively, we're dressing frumpy. And the connotation that your appearance affects your intellect. And again, this is still an issue today, and I have personal experience of this. Years ago, when I was in a different organisation, we were having informal one-to-ones about, they were opening up a new site, and it was basically finding out what people's ambitions were moving forward. And I had my one-to-one with the director of the organisation, and I was asked there were two things that were said in that one-to-one that really bothered me, really affected me. And, I have to say now I don't work for that organisation. I'm somewhere else. It's nothing to do with where I'm at now. The first one was, this was an informal setting, but they basically said to me, are you planning on having any more children? Now, this is crazy. And I know you're not allowed to ask this in a formal setting. You're never allowed to ask this in an interview, and it shouldn't have even been asked in this informal setting, but it was. And that really threw me off course. And I was like, what? And I don't even know how to answer that question because it's none of his business. But regardless, that was said. And the other thing that happened was I was relaying my ambition for the organisation and for my career development. And the response was, but you are a pretty face, so I think you would do better being on my reception. Again, I was absolutely gobsmacked that someone had just said that out loud to me. I don't know whether I was supposed to be grateful that he thought I had a pretty face. I just don't know where that came from or what the intention behind it was. And I just came away feeling so deflated. And don't get me wrong, receptionists run the place. I get that. There's nothing wrong with being on reception. They run the floor. They know everything. They are brilliant. But it wasn't what I had planned out for myself. And that notion that that's where I should be purely based on my performance really bothered me. And that shouldn't be the case. And I have had that from men and women. And that's not a place that we need to be. So I really want to be better at losing that perception based on appearance. Yeah, so it has made me think about moving forward, how I reach out to women and support them in feeling more comfortable in being on my podcast. And one thing I will say is I am really fortunate that I don't want to say I'm fortunate because I've actually intentionally done it. So it's not been by luck, but I am surrounded by really influential and encouraging female mentors. And they inspire me even if they don't mean to. And there are a few that I want to call out. And one is my first guest, Susie. She is absolutely brilliant. She is so good at self-promotion. She knows her worth and she will not do anything that is not worth her time. And she really inspires me. And I would encourage anybody to reach out and talk to her if you are feeling a bit low in the confidence front. She's so good. And she also has a book that you can read or an audio book. And I would just encourage you to go and watch and listen. It really helped me, and I will be her number one fan forevermore. She's brilliant. There are also a couple of females in my I say a couple, there are tons in my workplace who I look up to, who I am inspired by. And actually, one of the women, I hope she won't mind me naming her, is Tori. And she runs the Women's Network in my organisation. And she said something to a group, and that has really stuck with me. And that is, it's not a glass ceiling, it's a sticky floor. So actually, the onus shouldn't be on women having to break through a glass ceiling, because actually what's holding us back isn't necessarily anything to do with us. It's those perceptions that I've just spoken about. So, if a female is going up for a promotion, don't overlook her because she's got a flexible working pattern in place. Or don't let your perception based on her appearance skew your judgment on her ability. And I thought that was really amazing, and that's something that will stick with me. So my advice to women is to find a really good, strong mentor who will help and support you in your place of work. And then, yeah, my final closing thoughts is, as women, we do have a responsibility to put ourselves out there and give ourselves a fighting chance of getting that job, of getting that promotion, that pay rise, whatever it is we're after. If we don't put ourselves out there, we are doing ourselves a disservice. So we need to be better at self-promotion. There is also a responsibility of men in the workplace to be that advocate for women, to support them, to see their potential if they don't particularly feel confident about telling you their own potential, and also to be their allies. If you see inappropriate behaviour, if you hear those derogatory comments, please stick up for them. And it's not that you're coming to the rescue, it's just that it is not nice to have to tell a fully grown man not to call them hormonal. And if you hear that or you see that, just stand up for them and just become that sort of ally, and that really will help close those gaps that are still in existence today. So yeah, those are my reflections, those are my closing thoughts. Are we still in a man's world? There is still a little way to go, but equally there are some really, really inspiring women that are breaking all barriers, and I think we should be celebrating them. And yeah, thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. And I have got a whole host of guests that I have in mind that I really want to get on, that can inspire and motivate us to do more. So thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.